So let's talk about job growth. So one of the biggest things that we can pay attention to understand if there's a housing bubble or not, or housing crash, I should say, coming is job growth. Now, Utah was one of the first states to reopen after the COVID lockdown. And so this is a map that shows what the job growth rate has been since reopening for COVID. Now, the states that opened much later have a much lower or even negative job growth rate because of it. But you'll notice that Utah is listed at 6.9%, second highest in the nation. The first highest is Idaho, which is only 7%. So we're right at the top of job growth. And a lot of that is because people fled, the different coasts and decided that they were going to be remote and they were going to move somewhere near the mountains. And so we saw a huge influx of people coming in 2020 and 2021, a lot of inflation in our prices, but a lot of that was also driven by they're moving here because there's jobs. And so that's something to keep in mind as we talk about where we think rates and unemployment's going to go. So I love looking at this graph. So this is the Utah unemployment graph from 2000 until 2022. So you can see like we are always, I guess like back in January here, it was above, but for the most part, we're below the national average when it comes to employment. And you'll notice now it's right around like 2 or 3% right here, which is really low. I mean, it's hard to get much lower than that when it comes to unemployment. So we've got a very strong economy and a lot of jobs being created in Utah. So like I said, even though we're seeing some layoffs on some of the bigger tech companies, the job growth that's happening and the job creation is offsetting that. And so net, we're really around the same as we were last year. So this I like looking at because it's good to see. So this is growth in Salt Lake County, right? Like most of my rentals and most of the things that I do are in Salt Lake County. Of course, I work all over Utah, but Salt Lake County really is the financial engine for the state, right? It's the biggest county. It's the highest producing county. This is the number of metro payroll jobs. So that's W-2 jobs. This is kind of what we've seen since 2000, right? We saw this, it started to go up. It kind of went down a little bit, went up. Here's COVID. And then it's been just steadily climbing ever since then. And there's no, I'm not saying, I'm not predicting the future and I'm not giving a crystal ball prophecy here, but you can see a steady increase over time and in the recent that this most likely will not be slowing down completely, right? Like it may temper, but I don't see this going down based on the amount of jobs that are being created in Utah right now. Okay, so let's talk about mortgages. So one of the things that is critical when it comes to real estate is mortgages. And we've all found that out. Anybody that's been an investor, anybody that has been looking for a house in the last little while, the interest rate drives your ability to purchase wildly, right? So when we started at 3% interest rate in January of 2022, and we ended at close to 7% in the end of 2022, that massively changed people's buying power in terms of how much their mortgage payment could be. And it was really interesting because as I was working with buyers last year, they were looking at houses that were, say, $400,000, but at their 6% interest rate, they were paying more than people that bought similar houses for $500,000 the year before because they had a 3% interest rate. And so a lot of people only look at the price, but really the monthly payment is the biggest thing that matters to people when they're living in the home. I'm not talking about investors, but if you're living in the home, that's the most important thing. And so we've seen this dramatic increase. So if less and less people can buy at this higher price, prices are going to go down because the prices will always meet the market. So here is some signs that we're having a decline when it comes to interest rates. So we hit just above 7% earlier this year in November. So that was a 20-year high. So I bought my home in 2002, which was 20 years ago. And when I bought my home, my interest rate was 6.25%. And I was ecstatic that I got it because most people were over 7. I say that because many of us that weren't necessarily in the market 20 years ago don't have any historical place to look back and say that's actually not that unusual. What we're seeing now is people are finally starting to understand, oh, these interest rates that we're seeing are not going away. This is not like a 1 year and everything's going to drop down to 3%. My current, this is totally a humble brag. My current mortgage on my house is at 2.35%. I am never, ever moving or refinancing, right? Like it's like ridiculous how low it is. So, but many people in the last couple of years, even as people were saying, hey, these are historically low rates, now's the time to get in, they weren't really, it wasn't registering for them like what that meant to their buying power. One of the biggest things that I took away from this breakfast that I went to is really, if we look in like the next 10 years, the amount of growth that's supposed to happen in Utah, the people that are going to win are people that own property, because we're not creating more land and there's more people coming in. And an interesting fact is about 65% of our growth is actually internal, and only about 35% of our growth is coming from out of state. And why is that? Well, we like to have kids, right? And in maybe 20 years ago, kids had to leave the state if they wanted to go find entry-level good jobs somewhere, and then they'd come back in their, once they had a family. They don't have to do that anymore. So we're seeing this compounding rate of people that all want to be here, which is great. And the real winners in this situation are people that are owning property. Went the wrong way. There we go. So this is, again, this is national, and this is coming from that realtor breakfast that I went to, but you can see like we had this peak in 2022 and 2022 Q4. They don't anticipate that we're going to have a gigantic drop, but they do think that rates may come down to 5.5 or 6%. It really depends on what the Fed does, and it also depends on what mortgage companies decide to do. Now, if you think about it, mortgage companies are really looking for what the market will bear when it comes to those interest rates. Because, for example, a lot of new builders are starting to reduce their prices now because they have to come down and meet the market. And so there was a place, a subdivision in Farmington that actually came down $100,000 a unit in order to get them sold. And a lot of that is because they're national brands that just want to get out of their project and take their losses. But what we're really going to start seeing, I think, is that mortgage rates are probably going to stabilize. The biggest issue I've seen with people is they're very concerned, and I had this happen with multiple buyers in the last 4 months, where they qualified for a certain amount and then interest rates went up, and they had to requalify at a lower amount, and then interest rates went up and they had to requalify at a lower amount. And so they ended up getting a little fatigued in the market because they felt like they couldn't find anything. We'll start to see, I think, some more stability in our interest rates. Q3, Q4, there's a general consensus that that's probably when we'll start to see some good relief, but we're not getting back to 2, 3, 4% in the foreseeable future. I think that the 5 to 6 to 7 range is probably what we should be expecting. Now, something could happen, right? COVID happened. Nobody saw that coming. So I'm not saying that it's impossible for it to go back down, but given what we're seeing in the economy right now, I highly doubt that we're going to see a drop that drastic in interest rates. Before I go on to sales and prices, any questions on mortgage stuff, on the data that I presented? What can I answer for you? I'm that good. Okay. I don't really think that, but I'll take it. So let's look at some data. So this is a year over year change in median home price in Salt Lake County. And this is for all homes, right? So the single family, condo, townhomes, twin homes. A lot of the stuff that I do is strictly single family, but this is for all homes that were sold in Salt Lake County. So you'll see at the beginning of the year, we had this 26.9% year over year increase, right? Then 24, then 23, then 24, then 24, and then, soon as June hit, that's when all those locks expired and we had this gigantic drop. Now, the one thing that I want to point out, though, is that it's a drop in the increase of appreciation. We still had 14% appreciation year over year at this point, right? I think that's one of the things that people are maybe confusing a little bit. There's a big difference between a decelerating appreciation and an actual decrease or depreciation in housing prices. Now, that kind of continued throughout the year, and December was the first year in about 10 years that we've seen a decrease in year over year pricing for a specific month. And so we went down 2.1% in that month. So this is what I've been pulling. So these are single family homes in Salt Lake County. And this is what I wanted to show. So this is going back to the beginning of 2021. And we started seeing this large increase And we peaked around 636,000 of median home price in Salt Lake County for single family homes. Now that was at the end of Q2, right? Then we hit June, all those interest rates started going up and we started sliding down. And we ended the year at about 561,000 median home price for single family homes only in Salt Lake County. So we dropped about 11.7% from the peak. But this is what I want to point out, because everyone's freaking out about this right here, right? But what people aren't paying attention to is we actually are flat from last year. So maybe emotionally you feel like you got all of this money and then lost all this money, but the reality is we're slightly above where we were last year. So in the grand scheme, like it's, you know, if you want to say it's a lost year, you can, but for many people that are just living in their homes and making their mortgage payment and weren't planning on moving, none of that really was consequential, right? So our current median home price as of end of December is 561,000. Now, one of the things that I think is important, now this is going from 2021 to 2022, right? So if you look at this, or even if you like just look over here, you can think, oh my gosh, the world's ending. This is crazy. I can't believe how much prices are dropping. This is the crash. This is the bubble. But then let's take a look if we go back to 2012. So that is 10 years ago, right? So what we see from 10 years ago, and I just did the median home price in Salt Lake County for single family homes every fourth quarter since 2012. And we went from 220,000 to 562,000. So in the last 10 years, we've had 255% appreciation in single family homes in Salt Lake County. So that's one of the biggest things to remember. Real estate is a long game. Real estate is not a, you know, quarter by quarter game, right? You don't buy a house, plan on living in it for 7 years, and then look at Zillow every day to see what the price is, right? It would drive you crazy because you don't need to. And I think that's what a lot of people have been so fixated on. I've heard a lot of people talking about, hey, I'm waiting for the crash. Well, we just had a 10%, 11% decrease in home prices. That's a pretty good correction, right? So, so we've had a correction in prices, and it's directly related to interest rates because we still have low inventory. Now we have more inventory than we did earlier this year. Our days on market are longer than they were. So every week I actually do a market of the moment graphic and I post it on Facebook and I show like at different price points what the average days on market is before a house gets under contract. And for the first half of the year, it was single digits for almost every category. Things are moving so fast. Now we're up to, you know, anywhere from 25 to 45 days, depending on the price. Some homes that are higher priced are staying on even longer. What I think many people aren't realizing is like, it's not normal to have single days on market. That's not sustainable. It's more normal to have a 30 to 60 days on market. That was what it was, you know, back in 2017, 2018, when I first started. So, so the last thing I want to do is really think back and show what kind of appreciation we've had since 2000, right? I bought my house in 2002. So median home price was 158. I paid 127. So, so you can see from 2000 to now, we've had a 379% appreciation rate. So perspective is everything. If you're not thinking of selling in this moment, if you're planning on being in your home, then all of this volatility, and, you know, I say volatility, everybody wants to think of volatility as bad, but guess what? Volatility also means it goes up really fast. So there's been all this volatility in the market. If you're planning on staying in your home, you will benefit from that appreciation, but you don't need to worry yourself about like, oh, I could have gotten this last July, but now I'd only get this, unless you're actually trying to leave your house. And if you've had your home for 5 years, as we've shown, there's already been a gigantic increase just in the last 5 years. So even then, you still have tons of equity in your home that you might not have realized was there, right? So, so that is, the forecast is really this. So there isn't a housing bubble. What we're seeing is really related to interest rates. Now we're seeing positive job growth. We're seeing more people moving to Utah. We're seeing a demand for housing is still there. We see relatively low inventory, not as low as it was at the beginning of 2022, but still low. I think the mortgage rates are going to remain high. I think that we're probably going to be some stabilization in our housing prices in Q3, Q4. I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility that we may see a drop in median home price the first half of this year. I don't think we're going to see another 11%. I think that's a little pessimistic, but I think it's possible for us to go, possibly down another 5%, but nobody really knows, right? So we had normal seasonality at the end of 2022, right? Typically the real estate market is slow from Thanksgiving to the Super Bowl. And we haven't hit the Super Bowl yet. At least I don't think so. I'm not a sports guy. So we are poised to see what happens, right? There are a lot of people that stop looking. Are they going to start looking again? The snow has melted here, which is also weather is always a factor in when the market starts to pick back up. So we will see. I think it also, like, I'm talking in median home price. Every neighborhood's going to be different, right? So it's not, I'm not making a generalization that you can take to every single exact house, but I do think we're going to see a stabilization in it. And again, let's just remember how much appreciation we've gotten in the last 5 years, or even in the last 3 years, right? Like it's really easy to get caught on bad news and focus solely on that. But the reality is this is still a great market. There's still appreciation. A lot of us have equity in our homes. So it's really just a wait and see if you are thinking about buying. The other thing is this: in 10 years, is it going to matter, right? Like if people bought at the height of 2008, right before the crash, I guess 2007, right before the crash, they've still made a ton of money since then, just in the appreciation that we've seen in this market. And so even if you buy and you think you bought too high, in 10 years, is it really going to matter? Chances are no, because Utah doesn't have anything that looks like it's slowing down in the next 10 years. I mean, I'm not a Swami that has like a crystal ball. That's not who I am, but I'm just saying, like, knowing the economy here, we're very strong. So that's really what I have. I definitely want to open it up for questions. Here's my contact information if you don't have it. I also have a real estate group, just a Facebook group that I post things in, and we chat about what's going on in Utah real estate. So you're welcome to join that as well, but I'll open it up for questions.